Welcome to Roots Tech. We're so glad that you're here. It's a beautiful rainy day in Salt Lake City, and we're so glad that you've joined us. My name is Julia Anderson, and I'm a research specialist at the Family Search Library next door. And today, I will be speaking about going beyond the brick wall, strategies for pre-1850 US research. So let's break down some brick walls. Before we start, I need to remind you that we will be recording this, and there are no electronic devices that should be beeping or blurping while we're here, no audio or recording by any patrons, and no photographs of the slides. So let's address the elephant in the room right away. Why is pre-1850 research hard? Well, one of the reasons is because the records that we usually use for modern US research, which are census and vital records, are either vastly different or non-existent before 1850. For example, here's the household of William Griest in the 1850 census. You can see that his household includes the names of everyone that was living there, where they were born, William's occupation, the value of his real estate. But in 1840, the same household is only listed by the surname or the name of the head of house, William, and then there are numbers for the different categories for each sex and age group. In addition to this, vital records were much different prior to 1850. In fact, other than in New England, very few births and deaths were recorded by the government. Massachusetts was the first state to start keeping these types of vital records in 1841, and most states didn't do so until the end of the 19th or the early part of the 20th centuries. New Mexico didn't even mandate keeping birth and death records until 1920. Because they were considered a contract, marriage records, however, were usually kept from the date that counties were formed. And there's a few exceptions there: South Carolina, New York, and Pennsylvania. So my objectives for this presentation are to introduce pre-1850 research, review common pre-1850 record types, explain some helpful strategies for pre-1850 research, and present some research tips. And then the bulk of this presentation is actually going to be a case study. And I want to give credit. This class was originally conceived and prepared by my colleague Beth Taylor, who cannot be here today. All right, let's talk about pre-1850 research. So pretend this line is your ancestors' lifetime. It includes their birth, marriage, and death. It also includes the births of their children and their spouse's death. Or the spouse may have died much earlier, married. They may have had additional children by that second or even a subsequent marriage. These events are all part of your ancestors' lifespan. And when we think about the records that document these different events, they really don't end at the person's death. There could be records created after death that also give you clues. Their spouse may have even died after they died, so the spouse's obituary might have clues about them. Their children also likely died after they died, and the children's death records might have clues about your ancestor. As you do research, think about the lifespan of your ancestor's entire family and what happened after your ancestor died. So narrowing it down, you have your ancestor's birth, marriage, and death, and their lifespan continues all the way until the death of their children. When most people want to find the parents of an ancestor, their first inclination is to try to jump back and find records of their ancestor's birth. They focus exclusively on this time period, trying to go back an additional generation. The problem is if you focus only on the birth, you're actually missing out on a huge number of records that are created during the later part of your ancestor's lifespan. And some of those records may have even been created after 1850, providing more information than you would get in any earlier records. So because of this, it's helpful to break up your ancestors' lifespan into 3 distinct time periods. First, we have the period from the birth to their marriage. Then we have the time period from their marriage to their death. And finally, we have the time period from their death until their last child's death. And we're going to call those time periods birth and parents, marriage to death, and children. You may have noticed that the birth and parents time period is the shortest of the 3. It's also the time period where there will be the fewest records that had been created. Until a person came of age, they really weren't creating a lot of records. So of these 3 time periods, it's actually the most effective to start with the marriage to death, then all of the children's records, and finally the birth and parents. Usually, you'll find very important clues about the birth and parents in the later records for your ancestor. When you focus on marriage to death, you want to be sure that you locate every record, research the entire lifespan of the ancestor, research the life of all their spouses and their families, research the life of the spouse's former or later spouses. For instance, if your ancestor died very young, her spouse probably remarried, and there may be clues in the spouse's records. You also want to research the siblings, and you may not know who those siblings are right away, but when you find them, you'll need to research all of their records as well. From there, you want to be sure to keep going forward in time and trace the children until the end of their lives. In doing this, be sure that you identify each child that survived into adulthood, trace each child to their death, and note that the records of the children might include clues about the parents' lives. For instance, a death certificate often gives the names and birthplaces of the parents. Only once you've exhausted everything from marriage to death until the end of the lives of the children can you take those clues and go back to find the birth and parents. When you do, you need to identify those who are living in the same area with the same surname, trace each possible relative through their death, and you constantly want to be moving forward in time to exhaust all the records to the modern day. And you want to be looking for connections with your ancestor. So as you start this pre-1850 research process, keep these 3 time periods in mind and systematically go through exhausting all the records. That will give you the most information before you try going back to the time period where there are fewer records available. So this means that when you're doing research in the pre-1850 time period, you won't necessarily only be using pre-1850 records. It will be helpful to review some of the various record types available for U.S. research before 1776, from 1776 to 1850, and after 1850. So before the United States was a country and the region was mostly part of the British Empire, some key records were kept. A few of these are probate, land, court, tax, and church records. And in New England, towns also kept vital records, which is great if you are from New England. For the next time period, 1776 to 1850, we have some different record types added to the mix because then we had a federal government that was starting to keep track of the population, distribute federal land, levy taxes, deal with naturalization, build a military, and other things. So here's some of those records. Many record types we think of when we're doing genealogical research were actually not created until after 1850. These often have more information because records in the United States have tended generally to improve over time. Not always, of course, but in general. So how are you going to identify these available records? One of the most efficient ways I've found to do that is to start with the Family Search Research Wiki. Here's the United States genealogy page, but don't forget to look at the state and county pages as well. They are chock full of information. Every level of jurisdiction is going to have different record types and repositories, so you'll want to familiarize yourself with those before you begin researching. On the right side of the page, there's a list of resources of record types that you can use. And every one of those is a link that takes you to another wiki page explaining how to use that record type and where to locate it. So next, I'm going to introduce some strategies for pre-1850 US research. Two of the most common research goals for pre-1850 research are to identify a woman's maiden name and to identify someone's parents. It seems like this is pretty much what we're looking for when we go back that far. So for identifying a woman's maiden name, first we're going to look at the marriage to death time period. What records in that time period might give you that information that you're looking for? Well, we want to start with the records that are going to give us direct evidence or simply state the maiden name. That includes marriage, death, and church records, perhaps obituaries. And then we also want to look at records that give us indirect evidence, such as land, probate, guardianships, and other types. Then you want to research the children. Many records created for a child have a space to write the mother's maiden name. These can include marriage, death, and church records, county histories, obituaries, and even Social Security applications if the children lived into the 20th century. When you ignore the records of the children, you're potentially missing out on many clues that can help you get back to the earlier time period. Finally, after you've exhausted everything else, then go back to the records listed here. You want to identify the fan club, which is the friends, associates, and neighbors of your ancestor, land records, probate records, and court records. And most of the things that you're going to find in those records is indirect evidence that will lead you to a conclusion. Now, if your goal is to identify parents, it's the same type of problem. First, look at records in the marriage to death category that have clues about parents on those records. Then you want to think about what records of their children might have information about them. And then finally, what records from birth to parents will answer your research question. Remember, there's not probably going to be just one magic record that gives you the answer to what you want to know. You're going to have to put together many different clues from different record types. So here's some research tips to keep in mind as you start to tackle these pre-1850 research problems. And there's a ton I could say about each one of these tips, but this will get you started on the right track. So first, you want to start and stay organized. And often we think about that as being our papers and our files, but you also need to organize your research process and your time. Next, you need to locate original records. I know it's really tempting to trust what you find in an index or a derivative source like a book, but make every effort you can to find the originals. That information had to come from somewhere, and that's what we want to get back to. Next, you want to research every record type. Don't limit yourself to what's really easy to access. Focus on records that should answer your research questions. Next, search every repository. Local, county, state, and even federal repositories may hold clues about your ancestors. So if you don't find it on Family Search, it's okay to look somewhere else. Next, you want to evaluate everything. Don't take your evidence at face value. Figure out who made the records and why, who preserved them and for what purpose, and whether there might have been any incentive to lie or stretch the truth. Even if it's primary information on an original document, it could be wrong. Next, you want to research beyond your ancestor. Learn about the history of the time and place. Follow your ancestors' friends, family, associates, and neighbors. Some other helpful tips are to work from the known to the unknown. We always want to make a linking chain from what we know for sure back to what we don't know to make sure that we're on the right track. Next, ask lots of questions. Then you want to learn about the historical context of the place where your ancestor lived. What was going on then? Was there a war? Was there a famine? Was there a Great Depression? Next, you want to write down your analysis and conclusions. This is so, so, so important. When you're gone, no one's going to understand how you got to your conclusions if you don't write down your thought process. And remember that pre-1850 research problems are often solved with indirect evidence. Okay, so for the remainder of this presentation, I'm going to present a case study. And hopefully by seeing how this process works, you'll get an idea of how to apply these principles in real life. Okay, so we knew the following about William and Susan Griest Johnson. They were married in Montgomery County, Indiana. They were the parents of 9 children. Their youngest daughter was born in March 1866, and the mother, Susan, died less than 2 months later. Around this time, the children were farmed out to family members, and the 1870 census shows that William H. Johnson was living in a household with a woman named Hannah Johnson and a boy named Alva C. Johnson. It was known from previous research that Alva C. was William's youngest son. Other records confirmed William's identity in the record. So our research question was actually, who was Hannah Johnson? The 1870 census, if you recall, does not state any family relationships. So there was no direct evidence that Hannah was William's wife, sister, aunt, cousin, or some other person. So what does the 1870 census say? Here's the household of William H. Johnson. And I'll note that an important part of evaluating your records is going to be extracting, transcribing, and abstracting the information. William and Hannah were living in Washington Township, Hamilton County, Indiana. Hannah was 46, from which we can infer she was born about 1824, and she was born in Ohio. You can see that the youngest son, Alva, was also in the household. So before doing any research, we need to create a research plan. And before we create a plan, we first need a very clear research goal. Some of the things we want to know are what was Hannah's maiden name, who were Hannah's parents. Next, we need to establish which Hannah Johnson we're going to research. This particular Hannah was born in about 1824 in Ohio and was living in the household of William H. Johnson in Hamilton County, Indiana in 1870. So based on this information, our research goal might look like this. Identify the parents of Hannah, unknown, Johnson, who was born in Ohio in 1824 and resided in the household of William H. Johnson in Hamilton County, Indiana in 1870. Having a very specific, well-defined research goal is critical to your success. The next thing we need to do is kind of a preliminary step, and it involves doing a full census search for Hannah. Since we researched the 1870 census already, we added it to a research log. Research logs are vital to your success in pre-1850 research projects. If you don't write down what you did or did not find, you're not going to remember it tomorrow, much less in 10 years. At least I wouldn't. We should also start a timeline for Hannah to help us organize the information in a way that makes the most sense. Next, we need to focus on the time period in our research strategy that is from marriage to death. So census records are a foundational record type for U.S. research. They're federal records, and they can help us pinpoint exactly where a person was living at a certain time. And then we can use the name of the county to search for county records, which in U.S. research is critical to your success. So we need to locate the family in all the censuses from the marriage to the death, and that will help us determine all their residences. It will suggest death years and places for both spouses. It may suggest additional spouses and help us identify the children. So then we can use the information gathered from those censuses to build a research plan. A good research plan is a living document, and it can grow and change the more that you learn and figure out in your studies. But a census search can provide a really good foundation. So here's the household of William H. Johnson in the 1880 census, and an extract of the record. They were still living in Washington Township, Indiana. The 1880 census was the first census to give relationships. So here Hannah was listed as William's wife, which is really important to know. Also in the household were Timothy and Alva, known children of William and his first wife, Sarah, and an adopted daughter, Martha R. Carey, who was age 7. So new information on this census included the birthplaces of the parents of each individual. Hannah's father was listed as born in Virginia and her mother in Tennessee. Notice that Timothy and Alva's mother was listed as born in Indiana, but Hannah was born in Ohio. So that's further evidence, indirect evidence, that Hannah was not the mother of those children. So, as you're probably aware, the 1890 census was mostly destroyed in a fire in 1921. So the next census we can look for Hannah's lifetime was the 1900. William and Hannah were still living in Hamilton County, Indiana, and they had moved to Clay Township. The 1900 census has more detailed information than the 1880 census. From this record, we learn that Hannah was born in July 1824, and that she and William were both reported to have been married for 30 years, which means they married in about 1870, more indirect evidence. Hannah was said to be the mother of one child who was deceased. She was born in Ohio, her father born in Virginia, and her mother born in Tennessee. So the next census available was the 1910, but even though we searched and searched, we couldn't find results for either William or Hannah. Hannah would have been about 85 years of age in 1910, so it's possible that she was deceased by then. So that gives us a potential 10-year window from 1900 to 1910 where we could search for evidence of her death, and we know where she was living around that time. So as we do these census searches, it's important to keep adding the information to the research log and to our timeline. When doing a census survey, it can be very helpful to create a census comparison chart, and this will help you organize and correlate the information across the records. In the far left column are some genealogically significant events, name, birth, parent, spouse, and so forth, and the other columns are for each census in 1870, 1880, and 1900. So here's the information extracted from 1870, 1880, and 1900, and we can see that it's similar and comparable across the records. We want to evaluate it for consistency, contradictions, and tendencies, because this will be a clue for us to find additional records. Another helpful tool when evaluating census records is to compare the surnames of the neighbors of the person in question. And this is the surnames for 10 pages before and 10 pages after the couple in each census. And we'll get back to that later. After completing the census survey, we need to create a well-written research plan. And in order to do this, we have to know what records are available for the time and place that we're researching. This is called a record survey. And in this case, we need to learn about Hamilton County, Indiana, including its formation and its history, its start dates for vital records, and survey types and timeframes for other available records. A very good place to start for that record survey is the Family Search Research Wiki, specifically the county genealogy pages. This is the Hamilton County genealogy page. It tells me about the formation of the county, including when it was organized and how. You'll also want to look at the Family Search catalog for the county and other jurisdictions that cover that area, and get a sense of what records are available for the time period. Local websites can also be very helpful in this search. By completing a record survey, we learned where to find marriage, death, probate, and land records. So with this information, now we can make a research plan to identify Hannah's parents. It's all about using the best records for solving our research problem and achieving our goal. Remember, we want to focus on what records will help achieve my goal, what records exist for the time and place, what is the record access, is it online, in a courthouse, in an archive, or maybe did the records burn? Hasn't that happened to anyone? And then be specific. You want to know the record type, the research subjects, and the record locations that you're looking for. So our research plan is going to include the following steps. Locate the marriage record for William and Hannah, find death certificates, identify cemetery records, obituaries, and probate records for the couple. And once we found these records, we can evaluate them and start putting together the clues to solve our research problem. So here's a research overview. It includes my research goal, the preliminary census survey results, notes about the county, the record survey, the research plan, and future research goals. So this is something that you can create for every research project that you have, and it will help keep you on track and find your results better. The future goals section is what we want to know about the family, but we can't spend time researching it right now. This is a way that you can avoid rabbit holes and just going off on researching something that has nothing to do with your goal. So after the preliminary planning and preparation, it's finally time to do some research. So the very first thing on our research plan was to find a marriage record. But unfortunately, that was unsuccessful. So we searched databases of marriage records on Family Search and Ancestry. We ensured that those databases included the right place and time period. And we considered that it was possible the couple married somewhere else, in what we call a Gretna Green, like Las Vegas, somewhere where it's easy to get married quickly. Since we couldn't find a marriage record, we moved to the next step on our research plan, which was to find Hannah's death certificate. Ancestry has a collection of Indiana death certificates that covers the right time period when we estimated that Hannah died. So we started there. Searching for Hannah Johnson in this database brought up 887 results. Because we did the preliminary census survey, though, we had a better idea of where she died than just Indiana. So we narrowed the search to just Hamilton County, where we think she was living. We also narrowed the search by her death date, which we estimated was between 1900 and 1910. So we put 1905 for her death date, and then plus or minus 5 years, and that gave us that 10-year time span. With those additional search parameters, we were now down to 4 results. So that's much more easily checked. So notice that one of the matches was for a William H. Johnson, Hannah's husband. This is probably because he has an H in his name, or maybe Hannah was listed on the record. The remaining matches were for Hannah Muchler, Hannah A. Johnson, and Hamma, which was probably Hannah E. George. The index birth dates for these women, however, were not even close to the 1824 date that we estimated. We did notice that the second Hannah on the list was said to have died in Carmel, which is where William and Hannah were living in 1900. William also died in Carmel, so we wanted to look more into this person. Keep in mind that if there are indexing errors, you might not recognize your ancestor in the indexes. So you have to carefully review what the options are. So this is the record index for Hannah A. Johnson. It has her death date, 3 February 1906 in Carmel, Hamilton County, Indiana, and her birth date, 12 July 1883. But in brackets, it says 1823. It also says she died at the age of 22, which corresponds with a birth year of about 1883, not 1823. Farther down on the page, it says Hannah's husband was Hamer Johnson. William did have an H as a middle initial. So there was enough here that I wanted to scrutinize this closer. So looking at the original image of the actual death certificate, extracted the information. It definitely says she was 82 when she died, rather than 22. Especially noteworthy in this document, Hannah Johnson was a widow, and her husband had been Harrison Johnson, not Hamer. She was born July 12, 1823, and died at the age of 82 years, 6 months, and 22 days. The indexer could have mistaken the 22 in the days as Hannah's age in years, perhaps. Her parents were William J. Jeffries and Rebecca Emery, both of whom were born in Ohio. This information differs a little bit from what we saw previously, but it's as good as the informant knew at the time. Hannah died on February 3rd, 1906 in Carmel, Clay Township, Hamilton County, Indiana, and was buried 2 days later in Carmel. So I want to tell you to make sure you're not skipping entries in the index just because it doesn't really exactly match. Keep sleuthing and gather all the clues. Never hesitate to look at the original document to be sure of what it says. Next, we compared and correlated the information in the death certificate to that in census records by creating a table. Another record type we looked for was death notices or obituaries. This one was out of a publication called The American Friend in March 1906. It says, Johnson, at her home in Carmel, 2nd month, 3rd, 1906, Hannah, widow of the late Harrison Johnson in her 81st year. She was a birthright friend who will long be remembered as a dear mother in Israel. At the time of her death, she was a member of Carmel Monthly Meeting, Indiana. We also looked up the death notice for William. It states, Johnson, at his home in Carmel, Indiana, 8th month, 25th, 1903, William Harrison Johnson, son of Timothy and Michelle Johnson. He was a lifelong friend who was often heard praising God and left bright evidence behind that he was going home. So this confirms that William Harrison Johnson was the same person as William H. Johnson. And the record also gives several clues that William and Hannah were Quakers. They were called friends. They used 8th month, 25th date pattern, and Hannah was a member of the Carmel Monthly Meeting. The research plan that we created did not include Quaker church records on it, but with this information, we decided to pivot and look more into those in depth. So to learn more about Quaker records for the Carmel Monthly Meeting, we consulted QuakerMeetings.com, which is a great resource for that type of information. Here it shows that Carmel was formerly the Richland Monthly Meeting. And this is what the information for Carmel Monthly Meeting looks like. As noted on the previous page, Carmel was known as the Richland Monthly Meeting until 1892. Also mentioned are the Fairfield Monthly Meeting and Westfield Monthly Meeting. We want to make sure that we're looking in all the right record sets to find William and Hannah. Family Search has a number of Quaker records available, including records for the Westfield Monthly Meeting, and it included the following information. 2nd month, 2nd, 1870, William H. Johnson and Hannah Carey informed the meeting in writing of their intention to marry. But wasn't her maiden name on her death certificate Jeffries? 3rd month, 31st, 1870. Meeting reports nothing hinders the event. 4th month, 28th, 1870. Marriage of William H. Johnson and Hannah Carey accomplished and certificate forwarded to the recorder. So we couldn't find the official marriage record, but these meeting minutes show that the marriage did in fact take place. And if Hannah's name at the marriage was Hannah Carey, and her parents' last name was Jeffries, that could indicate a previous marriage for Hannah. So note that we're still researching in the marriage to death time period, and in records created after 1850. The Westfield Monthly Meeting had a membership list. Again, we extracted the information to aid with our comprehension and retention of the details, as well as to make it easier for researching in the future. So this was from the Westfield Monthly Meeting record of members around the 1890s. William Johnson, born in Dinwiddie County, son of Timothy and Michelle, received by birthright, Petersburg, Virginia. Hannah Johnson was born in Miami County, no state listed, daughter of William and Rebecca Jeffries. Alva C. Johnson, 6/27/1862 was his birth, son of William H. and Susan G. Johnson, received by birthright, Annapolis. So this also proves that Alva was not Hannah's son. Now that we had more information, we needed to keep comparing and correlating the evidence. This is a very important step and prevents us from missing less obvious clues. So next we checked that list of neighbors that I showed you a few minutes ago. We had more names that we wanted to look for, so we checked for them. Sure enough, there are Jeffries households in 1870 and 1900, and an individual named Carey in 1900. Going back to the 1870 census, The Alexander Jeffries household was enumerated on the page after William and Hannah, and Alexander was born in Ohio. This matches Hannah's maiden name and her birthplace, and their births were only a few years apart. So we traced Alexander as a possible relative and created a timeline for him. He was born September 22nd, 1826, and his death certificate said his parents were William Jeffries and Rebecca Embry. He was starting to look like a strong candidate for a family member of Hannah. Alexander was also born in Miami County and was a member of Westfield Monthly Meeting. And here he is on the membership list. Next, we needed to compare the information between Hannah and Alexander. They were both born in Miami County, Ohio, just a few years apart. Their parents appeared to be the very same people, although there was a small discrepancy in the spelling of the mother's maiden name and her birthplace. All the other information matched. And these clues were indicating that we were probably looking at a sibling of Hannah's in Alexander. So if we knew one of her siblings, that would help us identify her parents. There are a lot more steps in the marriage to death process, but we don't have time to cover all of them today. Some of them are finding obituaries, locating land records, finding probate records, and researching other Jeffries households in Hamilton County, Indiana. So here's the updated timeline for Hannah. Notice there are still a few gaps. The next time period in the 3 periods of research is to search for all the children's records until the end of their lives. At this point, we don't have any evidence that Hannah had children that outlived her, so let's skip to the next step. Since Hannah had a previous marriage to Mr. Carey, the next step is to research back in time from her marriage to William to her marriage to Mr. Carey. So our new research plan includes finding the 1860 census, locating the 1850 census for Hannah Jeffries or Carey. Then we wanted to find a marriage record for Hannah Jeffries and a Mr. Carey. We wanted to look in Quaker records for previous marriages, land records for a Mr. Carey, and probate records for Mr. Carey. And we had narrowed the time period and the place based on the other research that we did. So this plan's gonna help us figure out who Hannah's first husband was. So first on the new plan was to find her in the 1860 census. And we found her living with Cyrus Carey in Clay Township, Hamilton County, Indiana. She was the right age and she was born in Ohio, and there were 3 Carey children, Charlotte, Nathan, and Daniel, and a girl named Sarah Hyatt. In the 1900 census, Hannah was reportedly the mother of only 1 child who was deceased. Perhaps she was the stepmother to the Carey children. Note that both Daniel Carey and Sarah Hyatt were 11 years old. Different last names indicate that they were probably not twins. Sarah Hyatt could have been Hannah's daughter by another previous husband. If this were true, Hannah would potentially have married 3 times instead of 2. So next we went back to the 1850 census, and we located Sarah J. Hyatt, age 1, with Hannah Hyatt, who was the right age to be our Hannah, and both were living in the household of Rebecca Jeffries. The neighbors were Alexander Jeffries, whom we had already researched as a possible sibling, and Isaac Jeffries. Also in the household of Rebecca Jeffries were Sarah Jane and Richard Jones Jeffries. So we extracted all this information from the record so that we could follow it and review it later. And then next we compared and correlated the information from the 1850 and 1860 census records with what we had found previously. Notice that we have just barely gotten back to 1850, but by doing our due diligence with post-1850 research, we have located Hannah, even though she doesn't have the Johnson surname or the Jeffries surname. That's pretty good. We went back to the Quaker records and located the Jeffries family in indexes for the Richland Monthly Meeting, which you may recall was the precursor for the Carmel Monthly Meeting. Next to their names, it has some different codes, and it's important to know what those mean. RECRQ means received by request, and that means that they weren't birthright members in this monthly meeting. So in 1847, Hannah was liberated to marry Caleb J. Hyatt. That's the LTM, means liberated to marry. In 1852, Sarah was liberated to marry John F. Carey. And then in 1889, Alexander was received on certificate from the Westfield Monthly Meeting. As we continued to look through the index record, we saw again that in 1847, Hannah Jeffries was liberated to marry Caleb J. Hyatt, and in 1854, she was liberated to marry Cyrus Carey. There were still many, many records that we could search for that marriage to marriage time period, including probate, guardianship, land, the Richland Monthly Meeting records, and more Quaker records. I don't have time to show you all of this today, unfortunately, but it's still very important to make note of. So by adding this information to our timeline, we started to get a much richer picture of Hannah's life. At this point, it really looks like Hannah's parents were William and Rebecca Emery Jeffries. Before we come to this conclusion, though, we need to search the last time period, birth and parents. If we had started with birth and parents and went back to 1824 and looked for a birth of Hannah Johnson in Ohio, we would not have been successful. By researching the other time periods first, we gathered many names and were able to create some hypotheses that then could be tested. So based on research we had already done, we created a new research plan for the next step. It included early census, marriage, and probate records for William Jeffries in Hamilton County, Indiana, or maybe Miami County, Ohio. Later census, land, and probate records for Rebecca Jeffries in Hamilton County, and to trace the other children to their deaths. So we did find Rebecca, who was potentially Hannah's mother, in the 1850 census, and we could build off of that. Because we did all this research to get back to the pre-1850 time period, we already had a sense of who Hannah's birth family may have included. Her father may be William and her mother Rebecca, with siblings Isaac, Alexander, Sarah Jane, and Richard Jones. This made finding them in the pre-1850 time period so much easier. When working with pre-1850 census records, one of the best approaches is to predict what the family structure should look like and then compare it to what the record actually shows. So we took Isaac out for this census because the 1850 census showed him enumerated with a child born in 1839, indicating that by 1840 he had probably married and set up his own household. So we predicted what the household structure would look like if William were the head of house and if Rebecca were the head of house. Now, Rebecca would have been listed as the head if William had passed away prior to the census. When we looked at the 1840 census, we located the household of Rebecca Jeffries in Washington Township, Hamilton County, Indiana. She was living next to Isaac Jeffries, a John Jeffries, and 2 Hyatt households were also living next to them. And these could be potentially related to one of Hannah's husbands. Next, we compared the actual 1840 census to the predicted 1840 census. They were exactly the same, except for an additional female between the ages of 20 and 30. Based on this information, we added a few more details to the family. We did the same thing for the 1830 census. We wrote out what we would expect and then compared it to the actual record. We assumed William was probably alive in 1830 because he appears to have a child that was born in 1831. This census showed the William Jeffries household living in Miami County, Ohio, which is the place Hannah was reportedly born. That was a really good sign that we were on the right track. We always like it when things come together. When comparing our predictions with the actual record, it matched exactly except for yet another unknown female, potentially a daughter, under the age of 5. So using that information, we predicted the structure of the 1820 census for William Jeffries. We then identified the household of William Jeffries in the 1820 census for Miami County, Ohio. He was living next door to James and Isaac Embry, which was the potential maiden name of Rebecca that we located in our earlier research. So this is another sign that we were on the right track. The actual 1820 census matched the predicted structure except for an unidentified female child under the age of 10. From here, we put together another comparison chart based on each census record. It includes each person in the household and their predicted birth years based on the age ranges in the census. So you can see that even though those pre-1850 census records have scant information, that information is extremely valuable and necessary for us to use. From this information, we were able to locate the marriage record of William Jeffrith and Rebecca Embra in Miami County, Ohio. Note the name variation and how important it is to search in the right place at the right time for the records. If we were looking for a specific spelling of these names, we wouldn't have found it here. Since William was in the 1830 census but not the 1840 census, that indicated that he may have died between 1830 and 1840. And that gives us an approximate death date and place, so we were able to locate a probate record for him in Miami County, Ohio, which included his will. From that document, we extracted the following information. William's wife was Rebecca Jeffries. His children were John, Mary, Isaac, Elizabeth, Hannah, Alexander, Sarah Jane, and Richard Jones Jeffries. The will was signed by William April 13, 1832, and was witnessed by James Isaac and Moses Embry, who were likely relatives of Rebecca. It was proved 28 April 1832 in Miami County, Ohio, and that's evidence of his death. So this information tells us William died in April 1832, and he was definitely Hannah's father. The unknown daughters that we counted on early census records turned out to be Elizabeth and Mary. So again, after finding more information, we need to compare and correlate it with the information from our other research. Because we had fleshed out the family from other records, finding this will cemented the relationships that we had hypothesized, and knowing the other family members helped us know that we were looking at the right William and Hannah Johnson. We were also able to identify the unknown daughters in the census records. So after compiling all the evidence, the last thing we needed to do was compile a proof statement and write a conclusion. It's really vital to write out your thought process, as I mentioned before, as you're putting pieces of evidence in the puzzle together. This will help immensely when you're returning to your research, whether it's tomorrow or in 10 years. So here's a short summary of what we discovered. Hannah's death certificate indicates she was born July 12, 1823 in Ohio, and her parents were William J. Jeffries, born in Virginia, and Rebecca Embry, born in Tennessee. The Westfield Monthly Meeting membership records indicate that Hannah was born July 12, 1824 in Miami County, Ohio. So that's 1 year off, but the same day as the previous record. She was the daughter of William and Rebecca Jeffries, and Hannah's surname was Carey when she married, suggesting an earlier marriage. Alexander Jeffries, in 1870 and 1900, was a neighbor to William and Hannah Johnson, and his death certificate states he was born 22 September 1826 in Ohio and was the son of William and Rebecca Jeffries. This matches the information for Hannah and is why we suspected they were siblings. And we have Cyrus Carey. In 1860, Hannah was living in the household of Cyrus Carey. Also in the household was 11-year-old Sarah Hyatt. In 1850, Sarah Hyatt was living in the household of Rebecca Jeffries, which ties those two families together. Also in the household were Hannah Hyatt, Sarah Jane Jeffries, and Richard Jones Jeffries. So now we have Cyrus Carey and Caleb Hyatt. Additional Quaker records showed that Hannah married first Caleb Hyatt and second Cyrus Carey prior to her marriage to William Johnson. Then for parents for Hannah Johnson, in 1850, living on either side of Rebecca Jeffries were Alexander Jeffries and Isaac Jeffries, who was born in 1817 in Ohio. In 1840, Rebecca Jeffries was living in Hamilton County, Indiana. The family structure matches Hannah's possible siblings in the 1850 census. In 1830 and 1820, William Jeffries was living in Miami County, Ohio. William Jeffrith married Rebecca Embra on November 22, 1810 in Miami County, and William died in April 1832. In his will, he names his wife Rebecca and children John, Mary, Isaac, Elizabeth, Hannah, Alexander, Sarah, and Richard Jeffries. So our conclusion, Hannah Jeffries Hyatt Carey Johnson was the daughter of William J. Jeffries and Rebecca Embry, who married 22 November 1810 in Miami County, Ohio. And here's everything that we discovered on a timeline. And it's a long timeline, it's continued. So there were still steps to take in our research in the birth and parents section that we haven't discussed. And these include locating the probate packet for William Jeffries, guardianships for all the children, land records for William and Rebecca Jeffries, land records for Rebecca Jeffries in Indiana, probate records for Rebecca, and to trace each of the Jeffries children who were the siblings of Hannah all the way to their deaths. So we need to make sure that we're writing down all of these suggestions for future research that we came across. And so this is just a list of all of those little squirrel questions that I had while we're doing the research that I wanted to come back to later. All right, so to summarize, in this lecture, we've reviewed the elements of pre-1850 research, and we discussed some pre-1850 record types. We reviewed some pre-1850 records research strategies and research tips, and then we did a case study so you could see how this pre-1850 research process works in real life. So I think we have a little bit of time for questions. We have a couple of mics, so if you could just line up by the microphone and then give me your questions, that will be great. And then when we're out of time, we'll have to end. Okay, yes, sir, over here.
Okay, if she was married to 4 different people, who do we have her sealed to, or do we have her sealed to all of them?
So in the LDS church, the sealings would be performed to all of them, so she could choose later.
So my question is, we saw different spellings of the last name. Which one do you put in family search? Embry, Emery, Embra?
That's a really good question, and it's up to you, actually.
So
I usually put the name of the record that was most prominent. So if I see one certain spelling 50 times and the others only a few times, I would probably use the one that was more prevalent.
And then, of course, put the rest in alternate names.
Sure, yes, that's a very good idea. Okay, we're going to go on this side now. Yes.
Once we write up that conclusion, exactly where on Family Search do you put it? I've been putting it in memories. Where do you put it?
You could put it in memories, or you could put it in the notes section.
Just in notes. That's a long note.
It is a long note.
Okay, thank you.
One more on this side.
Yeah, in Family Search, there's like a quality index based on sources you've attached. Could you briefly say how that is? Is that AI? Is that, how do they come up with those quality ratings?
So the quality ratings on the profiles for Family Search, I think they have to do with how many sources are attached and whether there are any red flags. A red flag would be a child born after the mother died, or a marriage that occurred when the couple was age 3 and 4, something like that. So if there are no red flags and there are lots of sources attached, then I think it gives a higher quality. No one individual person is looking at the profile and deciding. It is all through the computer. One more question over here.
Is there a place you can get blank digital charts that you've been using?
So you can find blank charts on the Family Search Research Wiki. You can look those up and print them out to your heart's content. Okay, we have another question over here.
On your chart with the summary page, you had white lines and then you had a couple of lines that were orange. What were the orange lines that were, what did they mean?
I don't remember which slide you're referring to.
It was in the summary section and conclusions, and you had several white lines that were, that went across. And then there were several lines, like 3 or 4 lines that were orange. And were you
It was
highlighted
probably
them
for
some reason?
emphasis. I can't remember exactly what that is, but it was probably to call your attention to it on the screen.
But I was wondering, was that Rebecca's information, or was that her family's information, or?
If it was a source citation, it was probably the link.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure to be here at Roots Tech with you. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.